You can, for example, you can figure out a good initialization. That's one thing you can do. But already figuring out a good initialization, like going into a convex region, or figuring out like an interior point of a convex region, is already tremendously complicated. It's an optimization problem in and of itself. But let's say you can figure it out. That's one thing you can do. But other than that, that's not really a lot you can do. So you need a fancier algorithm, something like branch and bound, such that you can even make progress. Because otherwise, kind of these algorithms here, like it's different from the optimization algorithms you are familiar with in deep learning. Because in deep learning, kind of these optimization algorithms they have like a learning rate, and they have the weight decay, and then they have their like thousands of different betas and alphas and whatever people come up with, which need to be tuned. This is not true with these solvers. These solvers, they just work. So what you basically need to target is you need to target kind of the few arbitrary decisions that are in these algorithms. And if you have something like an interior point, which is that simple, like it's difficult to implement in the sense that you need to make it fast, but it's that simple from like a structural point of view. It's literally the same thing over and over and over again. No thinking, no branching, no decision making. It's just you have a thing, you do that thing, you do it again and again and again until you're in the end. And then you have algorithms like the simplex algorithm, where there are many decisions. So for example, it could be, in many cases, it's that you can go to one of these two points for improvement. Like this one would improve the results, this one would improve the results. Which one do you go to? Like which one of the variables do you pivot into the basis, and which one do you remove from the basis? That already is a huge problem. Especially, like, one of the other things you can think of is simplex algorithms. They only change one variable. They move one variable out of the basis and into the base, and another one out of the basis. You can think of two. Like you move two in and two out. In that case, these are known as block pivots. And block pivots, this is one of the holy grails that no one is able to kind of figure out how to do efficiently in a general way. Because with block pivots, you first of all get that combinatorial complexity, because you have you have the pairs, and it's very easy to get into oscillations and stuff like that. But it's also one of those things where like if you know how to do block pivots, like in a provably not dumb way, for example, you get the simplex down from like a worst case exponential runtime into a worst case polynomial runtime. And the practical advantages would also be huge, because essentially what this would allow you to do, like if you think about it, a block pivot, like let's say this is a surface, a block pivot that kind of changes two things on the basis will allow you to do this and step right through. Like, or if you allow three, it would allow you to step with 3 dimensions. So, yeah, huge problems are in there, and these are the kinds of things where, yeah, you can reasonably do things with machine learning, because kind of the correctness is given by the algorithm. Even if my node selection heuristic is absolute garbage, it's not going to change the correctness. Because the correctness is simply, you go through every single node, you go through every single branch, and then you look and meanwhile you look, okay, which branches do I not need to explore? But I'm not changing which nodes I don't need to explore, and I'm not changing the actual branching part. I'm just changing the ordering. Effectively, it's a fancy sorting algorithm. So, that means that my method cannot change the correctness, and that's the very important part. And it's hard to do in these simple algorithms like interior point methods.
And but based on sort of scaling and like overheat, is it true that your algorithm here is usually not the main consumption of resources, and the underlying like solver is?
It depends. So, first of all, you have to remember, we're looking at very, very, very different problems. And what you can simply do is, if you want to figure out kind of what the ranges are, like, remember, all of them have gotten 45 seconds. The runtime of the GNN is roughly, it's not constant, but it's like larger graphs are going to take more time. But for example, if you see something like this one here, which only exploits 6 nodes, it didn't exploit 6 nodes because the node selector became really, really slow. It became that because solving a problem took a really long time. This is especially true. Like, remember, we had talked about kind of this dual method, like where effectively in the dual method you can add constraints in later, because kind of you model it as A, T, and we had the chicken. This one. This is also the trick you use to kind of get these less than or bigger than constraints in there. Because effectively, instead of adding chicken, we add kind of the constraint of x1 and then 0, 0, 0 if you want to branch on x1, and kind of add the b value of b, let's say, equal to 1. Right? So, that effectively means that after you've solved the first problem, or after you've solved kind of the initial thing, usually you can solve kind of these branching problems in a couple of steps. Usually. That's not always true, and especially it's not true in min-LP lifts, because it's a non-linear part, so you could walk from a nice part into a very ugly part very easily. But you could, for example, see something like Ulysses 16, where definitely, like, where, for example, here, the algorithm is not the expensive part, because the algorithm basically ran instantly. Here in this instance, our node selector would be much, much more expensive than everything else.
Okay, but I don't quite get it, how the algorithm decides sort of... So, if I understand correctly, the number of nodes that the algorithm will traverse ultimately depends on sort of how small of the fractions we take from the main problem to consider as a sub-problem. And how does it decide how to split? Like, what proportionality should use?
What branch and bound does, branch and bound simply takes like a weird space, or which, for example, integer space, which like looks like this, with individual points. Only points here are feasible. Nothing else is feasible. And what it does is it finds a solution in the relaxed point. So in the relaxed, you assume the entire thing is valid. It finds a solution. Let's say it's this node here. And then it notices, well, this is not feasible. I'm going to snip, such that kind of no solution gets lost. I'm going to look at this problem here and this problem here. So this is how we get the subproblems. So the subproblems are basically based on like a divide and conquer of the search space, and you divide based on the information of the previous relaxation. So for example, in the next iteration, for example, it might figure out, hey, my optimal point is actually down here, and I said, okay, I'm going to split to here and to here. So this problem here, this would be empty, so it would be instantly solved. This problem here is now this region down here, because we split here and we split here. And then we solve this again and again and again, up until you either find a solution or you figure out it's empty. This is the branching part. The bounding part now says, well, certain points here are so bad, like certain regions are so bad, there cannot be a solution in there. And you use the fact that in global optimization, you get a lower and an upper bound. And you basically say, well, if the lower bound in that region, so the value you can get in that region, possibly, is a minimum of 50. So the minimum is already 50. But in this problem up here, I already found a minimum of, let's say, 20. Then never need to look at this region, because I already found the 20.
Yes, this part I kind of understood. You just said that for some of those algorithms, we had like 6 or 7 nodes, but it doesn't mean that it was an easy problem. It means that for each node, the process of finding even this, how we say, floating point solution, basically, is still very complex and takes a lot of time. And I was a bit confused because for some of them you also had zero gaps. So essentially you say maybe those were actually easy runs, because in this case I just don't understand how we can in so few number of splits solve a problem that takes a lot of time for I guess I understand. Yeah, it is basically those where we got zeros and low number of nodes. Those were actually easy problems, and when those where we got low number of nodes but non-zero gaps, those are hard.
Yeah. So what can of course happen is, even if you don't explore many nodes, you can still easily get like very low optimality gaps. You can think about this like this: like you have a gigantic space, like a trillion-dimensional space possibly, and you find the actual point. Like it's going to take you a long time. But once you are there, what could happen, for example, is, let's say you have a space that looks like this. So, this. So, and you find this as an optimal point. So, this is a very, very slight slope. This is not exactly 90 degrees. Like it's let's say 90.0001. So, what does it mean? Well, it means that effectively this point is nearly exactly the same. And let's say this point, like the integer nodes would be here. So this is an integer, int, and this here, random, is also an integer. The first iteration is going to find this one, because this is the optimal point in the continuous version. And now we're going to do the following. We're going to start branching and bounding. So we are branching here, and we are. Or, no, we wouldn't be branching here. We, of course, would be branching here at our integer, like this. And let's say, like, the problem actually goes on up here. So, and then our node selector figures out, hey, let's first try out this thing here. So let's try to solve the lower problem. And it's instantly going to find, like in this case, with one single step, or with a half a step, in simple it's called a half step, we're instantly going to figure out, okay, this is the correct one. So what you're going to get is, you're going to get a node, and a node has like a solution of 12 and 12, so lower and upper bound is the same. So this node here is done. And then with the higher one you can see kind of if the optimization direction is this one here, you can already see kind of we have walked very, very far away. So this one might not even be integer now. So, because for example, it might kind of walk somewhere even further. Whatever the thing is doing, like in this case, it would pick up this point here. But kind of the second point is something like maybe 14, 13. We can instantly prune this away because we found a 12 solution. And this can be at best 13. It's already so far away.
Okay, but a very stupid question, but if you are splitting on the integers that lie from both sides from your floating point solution, then why do we have 2 nodes and not 3 nodes? Because there is also, like, I guess, the third internal part, no? I don't...
The internal part only consists of floating point solutions. So remember, we have something like 1, something like 1, 0. Your solution falls in here. So now you round to 1 and you round to 0. What's going to be in here? So in here, there's going to be the solutions 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. These are never going to be integer, because we can round to the next integer. So we don't need to select this. There's nothing interesting there.
Okay, I was just confused about, like, in the multi-dimensional case. I guess that's because you are drawing this in one-dimensional case. But in reality, when we are partitioning, we are using sort of hyperplanes that are parallel to... Yeah, here I'm a bit confused. Parallel to one particular...
To one axis.
Like one axis, yes. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, so basically we are looking for to add constraints which are parallel to one of the axes. So this is what branch and bound does, and for example other algorithms like branch and cut, which have these cutting planes in addition, what they are also doing is they are also trying to figure out clever cuts which kind of go diagonal. So they're not so for example that go like, let's say you have like a problem like this, and here for example you have a solution, and these, and for example this would be an integer and this would be an integer, and kind of the cutting planes, what their trick is, they try to kind of cut off these like off angle things, and they can be very good at this. Kind of and there are many different ways of doing these cuts. They can be very, very efficient. They're kind of dicey numerically sometimes, which is why branch and bound is so nice. But you can build very general algorithms with this. And especially if you have kind of like a weirdly rotated polytope, then these cutting planes can become very, very important. They're also very interesting for like nonlinear optimization as well.
Okay, but then again, a silly question. If you say that we are partitioning on the axis for one constraint, like for one variable, then those examples that you show here, how many? So I'm not sure what is like the ratio between integer variables that you need to optimize and floating point variables. Because, for example, in minimal cut, we want to optimize for each node, like 0, 1 membership of the cut. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so first of all, because we are talking about max flow min cut. Max flow min cut is also theoretically a discrete optimization problem, but it's one where it turns out that the vertices, so the actual like corners of your simplex, the optimal vertex is always going to be on an integer solution already, which is why you don't need branch and bound. So this is the type of stuff that people that are interested in proofs do. For example, there is like a totally unimodal. There's one of these statements. I think I'm not sure whether or not max flow min cut is totally unimodal. I'm not sure. Would need to Google that. Probably not. No, certainly not. It's not totally unimodal, obviously, because it has weights. But so, for example, if you have structures or if you have models that can do this, that is very nice, of course. But it's not generally true, of course. If you look at, for example, the TSP problem here, so we are using the MTZ formulation. There's also a more modern one, which is the Danzig, Fulkerson, Johnson DFJ formulation. And what the DFJ formulation does is it's very clever. In a sense, what they are doing is remember the cutting plane technique I showed you here, where you cut off the edges. They're effectively using this to kind of generate constraints on the fly. So basically, you solve like a TSP problem, which is fully, like more or less fully unconstrained. You look where you come out, and then you add one additional constraint. The reason we haven't done this is because you need this very special, like very specialized cut generator. Yeah. So if you look how many variables this has, so this weird thing here, which kind of makes, is a node order, kind of assigns you a node order. So these things here, these are binary, these selectors, and then you have this guy here, which gives you the actual node order. So, and these are fully integer. So this is an example of how this would look like. So this would have like n squared. Yeah, n squared plus, what was it, n? Yeah, n squared plus n.
Maybe not n squared by, but actually n squared by half, but yes.
No, you actually need the symmetry here.
Okay.
So,
it makes sense. Yeah, it is obviously that you can travel in both directions, not like
Yeah.
it is not the same.
Yeah, there's also lots of work going on, for example, in characterizing like these transport polytopes, like or here these TSP pops. There's lots of work going on kind of how to write them down. Like tons and tons of research. So maybe to give one interesting thing, like really what you can think of these linear programs, for example, is you can think of them as being like two parts. One of them is the actual like constraint problem, ax less than b. This is this kind of one part that kind of gives you the polytope. But then you can kind of consider that some of these constraints may kind of be symmetric to each other. So for example, what you could have is you could have a constraint minus 2 minus 2x1 minus 3x1 is less than or equal to 1. And you have one that is 2x1 plus 3 or 3x2 or is less than or equal to minus 1. So kind of these are symmetric. So this effectively combined these to give you equality constraints. And of course, if you kind of go through all these different combinations, you can kind of think of, you can find like linear combinations of some problems or of some rows. And why is it interesting? Well, it's interesting first of all for explaining what the dual variables are, but I'm not going to do that. And secondly, it's interesting because really what we're having here is we now have the implicit constraint 2x1 plus 3x2 equals minus 1. So actually, if you think about this as like, for example, a three-dimensional problem, like this, what you have is you have one hyperplane on which all these points live. So you can think about this as, even if you have like a three-dimensional, or in this case a two-dimensional problem, what's actually happening is you have like a hyperplane in here, inside of which the actual polytope lives. So in fact, you could theoretically get rid of one dimension. So this is the type of stuff that people are interested in, where you can kind of get rid of certain dimensions or kind of eliminate certain things.
This is kind of dimensionality reduction in integer space.
Yeah, so this is not integers, this is linear programming already. An integer program actually becomes really difficult because after rotating your problem to kind of eliminate one of the constraints, what could happen is that generally speaking, your integer constraints no longer integer, and you kind of you pay for the fact that it's harder to do the cuts often. Unless you can do like certain tricks again, it doesn't matter, not important. But for example, one of the interesting things you can prove as TSP, like that's one of the things you do if you have like a polyhedral theory class, which I did. One of the things you prove is for example, that TSP has only kind of has 2 to the n dimensional space. If you kind of go with the cutting, so this is the number of constraints, minus n. And kind of the minus n comes from the symmetry. Or no, it doesn't come from symmetry, it comes from the pairwise connections, I think. And this is the lowest dimension you can get easily. You can theoretically always project it down into like a 0-dimensional problem if you really want to, or a 1-dimensional problem. I know, 0-dimensional problem if you want to. That's what the Fourier-Motzkin elimination does. But you pay for this by exponentially increasing the number, or doubly exponentially increasing the number, because of Fourier-Motzkin, the number of constraints. So effectively, you can kind of think about this, is you can either have a high-dimensional problem with fewer constraints, you can have a low-dimensional problem, which looks like you threw showers of glass on the ground. And usually, the dimensionality reduction isn't worth it, because, remember, how our basis is defined. Our basis is limited by the number of constraints. So you generally want few constraints, lots and lots of variables. Because that's what you can easily deal with. So this has n squared plus n minus 1 variables. Facility location problem, what does this have? ij, I think that's... Yeah, I think that's number... Yeah, that's number of facilities to number of customers times number of customers plus number of facilities. So think about this. This is which factory delivers to which customer, and this is which factory is actually built. And you can also see this here in the objective. These are the construction costs, and these Cij is the cost of going from facility I to customer J, and Dj is the demand by one of these. And you have Cij, which is whether or not the connection actually exists. Yeah. And then of course, for example, you have here this like there are tons of modeling techniques as well, like the big M technique here. Again, not going to explain that. Google it. But yeah, there's tons of interesting things you could do in this space. Tons of very interesting stuff. Okay. Alright, I saw. I think people. Okay, people are writing into the open machine learning text. Okay, he found it. Okay. So, that would be it for me. Unless someone has questions. Like, there are still tons of things I can talk about. I can talk about dual variables if you want to. I can talk about other techniques. I can talk about constraint handling, but I'm not sure how interesting this is.
What does code look like for this?
Nightmarish. One of the big problems is, and I talked about this briefly in the paper and also here, is performance. Performance is a huge constraint because this thing needs to run for every single node. If you have 600,000 nodes, then you need to run this 600,000 times. So the way this is built is, so Skip has specific kind of hooks where kind of you can register your own node selector, your own like cutting plane selector, your own cutting planes techniques, your own variable selector, whatever you might think of. You can write in and select, or just your primary heuristic, diving heuristics, whatever you can think of. So this is how I hook into Skip, and basically I say just use that selector. Then what I need to do is I need to do kind of the actual feature extraction and feature processing. This takes a surprising amount of time because, for example, if you want to get statistics over your variables, you need to ask Skip for all your variables, which can be millions. So what I'm doing in practice is I implement this in Python. So basically like C-compiled Python, which still has like global interpreter log overhead in many places, but on everywhere. And you have the advantages you get when basically you think about Python kind of compiles the same way as like a standard library of Python is compiled. So you get kind of you get much reduced overhead, and I'm using that. Still, it's the case that the actual feature extraction for large, like the very large problems, actual feature extraction is very, very slow compared to how it should be. Now, of course, when I say slow, I mean if you have a 45-second problem which needs to solve 18,000 nodes, every node can be at most 45 seconds times 80,000, and that assumes you can solve your entire problem each instance in zero time. So you need to run this really, really quickly. So the code is nightmarish. Yeah.
But is there some way to optimize it? Like, is there maybe this is kind of a future work. Is there a way to essentially, yes, further optimize. I understand that you can do optimizations based on caching and based on probably faster feature extraction and this histogram construction, like those types. But maybe there is something more like more general.
So, in general, you're always going to be limited by the fact you're evaluating a neural network. Neural networks are slow, even the fast ones. Neural networks are really slow. It's not as bad here because you only solve like 600,000 nodes, not 600 million nodes, as you do in like SAT solvers or like industry strength SAT solvers or other problems like this. So it's not as bad, but it's still going to be limited by the neural network. In practice, though, I think you could get this like orders of magnitude faster if you just implement it like from scratch and see. I'm just not going to do that because, well, if I implemented this thing in C, I would still be implementing it.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And that's, by the way, not only a problem here, it's a problem in general. Especially like LP solvers. I talked to some of the people that work at Gorobi a while ago. And basically what they are doing is, if a new paper, like on a new technique for simplex solvers comes out, or something like this, they look at this, and basically they need to judge very roughly. Like they look at the benchmarks, but not like kind of absolute numbers, but kind of how it behaves on individual instances. And then they say, well, does it make sense? And basically based on that, they try to build an implementation. Because you cannot look at the like actual performance, because the actual performance of whatever like toy solver you're implementing is so far away from what the actual industrial strength solvers can do. Like Skip is a very, so for example, Skip is a very, very strong solver. It's also an industry-ready solver. It's the best solver that exists in like that exists outside of industry. So it's an open source system, slower. So yeah, they're like all of these solvers are ridiculously fast and ridiculously strong. And kind of all of these are industry strength, but there's the levels to this. And in general, if you run like your experimental thing, which is not built for performance, it's built for being experimentable with, you're not going to go close to the actual performance. Especially, like, it becomes worse the faster iteration of the algorithms are. That's why for example, I looked at branch and bound and I did not look at simplex. Though, for example, figuring out like a technique that maybe does block pivots or something like that could be very cool. Okay. Yeah. So that's it. I only went 20 minutes over. That's good. Did I only went 20 minutes over?
No.
No, you went
1 hour
hour
and 20 minutes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
But 20 minutes is exact time.
It's perfectly in time. It's exactly what I expected. Yeah. So something
Are we in
interesting
the
happened this week.
discussion zone now?
Did something interesting happen this week? Oh yeah. OpenAI self-destructed or didn't self-destruct, however you might think about it.
They reimagined themselves.
Did they? Like, it
in
was
the
a lot
same
of.
form they were before.
Yeah, it's the same play. Okay, no, I think they lost a couple of people that now already went off somewhere else. Like, I'm not sure whether everybody that quit after Altman was, fired. Yeah, okay, fired is the right word. Was fired. Like, I'm not sure whether or not all of these people returned.
And Ricardo
Microsoft almost got really lucky, huh?
Yeah. Like, honestly, I am very interested to like in maybe a couple of years learn what actually happened there. Because no, I don't believe it's like another AI that is too dangerous to release, too dangerous to stop, that suddenly appears out of nowhere. I think that's just they made something up to not lose face. So, but I'm actually very interested in what was happening behind the scenes.